It's been an eventful offseason for the Cincinnati Bengals, and in last month's draft, they added 10 new picks. And Joe Goodberry is here to talk about each one in the state of the franchise. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Joe Goodberry. And Joe, let's start with the fifth overall pick, Ja'Marr Chase. Did the Bengals make the right call, in your opinion, adding another weapon to Joe Burrow's arsenal?
I do think they made the right call, especially when you start to factor in how they felt about Ja'Marr Chase. I mean, it was clear to me that they thought he was a blue chip, can't miss kind of guy, right? So if you feel that way, you don't pass on him. Now, the debate would be, well, wasn't Penei Sewell also a blue chip, can't miss guy? If you read other, websites and reports and things that have leaked, there are some teams that didn't believe so, and maybe the Bengals were one. So if it was a blue chip guy versus a guy at a position that they thought could be good, well, then it's easy to see why the decision was made the way it was. And they wanted Ja'Marr Chase all along. And they were probably pretty lucky a team didn't jump ahead of them, because I think it became pretty clear to everyone those final 48 hours or so, even though I think most people felt earlier than that they would lean Chase. But it became crystal clear those last few days leading up to it. And, they're lucky that they got him. And I think it completes their receiver core, whereas picking a Penei Sewell wouldn't have completed their offensive line unit, right? So I think you now have a strength of the roster, and that's wide receivers. It all comes down to, I think everyone that was on Team Chase says round 2, O-line is going to be a big need, and you're going to have to handle it, and it's going to be a lot of good players there. If they hit that one, it's going to really reflect on the Ja'Marr Chase pick. Ja'Marr Chase pick is like an A-. That could be an A+ if the Jackson Carman pick works out.
No doubt. And I want to ask you about Jackson Carman, because I think initially, at least, that was a big surprise. Maybe not so much so now in hindsight, looking at least how the Bengals view him as a player. But for just a little bit more on Chase, because there was this national narrative before the draft. Mike Greenberg was one that certainly pushed this. Mike Tannenbaum is someone I reacted to, because he said if the Bengals don't take Sewell or one of the offensive linemen, they should be sent away to NFL Europe or some non-existent league because they don't belong in the NFL anymore. And obviously that's dramatic. But how do you view Chase as a prospect? How rare is he? Because there's a lot of people that point to not just John Ross, but Corey Coleman, Corey Davis, all these first rounders that play the wide receiver position that didn't work out. And then on the flip side, you have the Tyler Boyds, the Mike Thomases, all these second round receivers that have worked out in recent years. How rare is Ja'Marr Chase compared to, the past 5, 6, 7 draft classes? And was he worthy of that pick considering his position and the hit rate on first round receivers?
I struggle with the idea that first-round receivers have a lower hit rate than other positions, because I think when you look at it, I struggle because we have more data now. We have more analytics involved in the draft process. You look at receivers, did they produce at a young age? Do they test well? What type of competition did they go against? We have no questions on Ja'Marr Chase with all that stuff. Meanwhile, when you have other guys like John Ross who can't finish his testing because of an injury at the combine, injury history, you have Corey Davis who never tests. It's like you probably shouldn't put him in those categories. Ja'Marr Chase didn't have these issues. To me, he's like the best receiver since Amari Cooper. I really love Sammy Watkins, Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, he should be in that category. Guys that produce at a young age, that tested very well. And we hope he's not Watkins, because Watkins never truly became a number one. But if he's Odell Beckham Jr. with the attitude that we know Ja'Marr Chase has, I will take that. And I think every Bengal fan would. So I struggle with that narrative. But also, because the Bengals had a specific need at wide receiver. They couldn't just take any wide receiver. I think that was the argument that all these national pundits were forgetting, is they would say, well, they have Higgins and Boyd. They do. You're right. Because they have Higgins and Boyd, and because we like Higgins and Boyd, but Boyd is a slot guy, and the Bengals want to keep him where he's at his best in the slot, you're going to need another boundary guy. And Higgins, a lot of people really liked him, but said maybe he doesn't have that speed. Maybe he doesn't have the agility. Maybe he doesn't have that burst of a true number one type guy. Well, then it becomes very clear. You need a number one X-type receiver that will make those two guys even better. And I think that's why you look at it and you maybe had 2 or 3 prospects in this entire class that fit that role. And they figured we can get that guy at 5 and then come back and get the O-lineman. So I think they executed it perfectly in terms of we have this need. He would fill this need. Now he makes our receiving core good. In my opinion, the last time the Bengals were in this situation, taking A.J. Green in 2011, I think they're very comparable prospects. Green would probably go ahead of Chase because of the size, and NFL teams love that little bit of size. But I think in terms of doing more and being more flexible, yards after the catch, and just mentality of that aggressive mentality, I love the Chase pick. And look at the last generation of Bengals football. Andy Dalton, A.J. Green, Geno Atkins, all their best players, right? Any alpha personalities there that were really, outspoken, taking the team under the wing, something that the team could absorb, even with Marvin Lewis. They absorbed Vontaze Burfict, if anything, in those big games. I don't think they want that anymore. Now you're absorbing guys like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and I think that's a direction you want to go forward with.
Speaking of directions, they move forward, and a lot of people assumed in round 2, Tevin Jenkins. If Tevin Jenkins is there, he's the pick at 38. I think you tweeted it. I know I wrote about it. Everyone was talking about, if Jenkins falls to 38, why not pick him? Because the board did fall the Bengals' way. There were a ton of offensive linemen available when they were on the clock in round 2 at 38. And instead of staying on the clock and making the pick, they trade down to 46. But later I find out it didn't matter. At 38, they were in on Jackson Carman. And really not even later. I think we knew hours before the second round started that was the case. And so I think the trade down certainly helped the value. But how do you view that overall? Because to me, and I think to most people, at least initially, it felt like a big risk, not only trading down, but this idea that Jackson Carman is going to be a better NFL player than Tevin Jenkins and some of the other guys that were on the board.
I look at the years where they targeted players around early, whether it's like, oh, we need a center. We like Russell Bodine. We like Will Clark. We want Jeremy Hill. Remember, like Dave Lapham used to call this stuff out the day before, the round before they even picked him. Those were their worst drafts. Their best drafts were when they're like, who's here? Oh, okay, I guess Mohamed Sanu, we'll take him. I guess Marvin Jones is still here in the 5th. We'll take him. George Iloka. I mean, that's when you let the draft fall to you in a deep draft, you're better off. Now, I thought they were doing that at O-line, right? The whole argument, the Chase versus Sewell thing was, you will get a good offensive lineman there at 38. And they did, and it landed. We're sitting there after round 1 going into day 2, we're like, perfect. There's like 8 guys here we would take. And like we were mentioning Jackson Carman with those 8 guys. We're like, there's 8 guys here that we would take, and one of them's going to be there, if not multiple. And they were. Like you, I also heard hours, that morning it was Jackson Carman as. Now, maybe they're looking at it like Jackson Carman is their best offensive lineman on the board remaining. And I just can't come to grips with that idea. And I don't dislike Jackson Carman. I thought if they took him in the 3rd or 4th round, I would have been completely for it. I thought he looked like a guard, definitely. He played tackle, protected the blind side of Trevor Lawrence, played in big games. He had some production, but there's definite technique issues. There's definite, hand and feet. You got to be in unison, and he's really not there yet. I think guys with that type of issue that struggle in space, you kick them at guard when they're that big, that powerful, and that athletic, they're probably going to be good guards. But that is a transition or a projection, whereas there were actual guards there at that pick and even in the 3rd round that could have probably stepped in and give you better, maybe the first 8 games or so, give you better production. They think Carman's going to be better in the long haul, which is a fine take to have, but you need a right guard this year. So I think Carman's penciled to play right guard right away. He may have some growing pains early on. And I don't think the Bengals can afford to have that right now, given the options they were presented with, not only in free agency and in the draft. So they're taking a risk. They're saying this, and I said during the 2nd round, this reminds me of the Drew Sample trade back. And not because they ended up not having the guys they expected to be there when they came on the clock. I think like A.J. Brown could have been that pick that year, and he was gone 1 or 2 picks ahead of that. I think it was more of they knew they could take Jackson Carman, and they felt like he would still be there, and he was the guy they wanted. Well, if you feel that way, how come no one else took him? That it should also be the other side of that of whenever the Bengals feel like they're smarter than everyone else, the thing with Drew Sample, everyone had him like 5th, 6th round. Oh, well, someone would have taken him. Those are always the reports afterwards, right? I don't care. Then let someone take him, because you don't reach for a guy that you feel that much differently about than the rest of the league. That usually means you're wrong.
And the other part of this is Tevin Jenkins, and there was talk about different injuries, hip, shoulder, things like that, some character concerns. Well, he didn't fall. He didn't fall out of the top 40. He wasn't a 3rd round pick or anything like that. And so to your point, that is going to be a concern. And so let's look at the Bengals offensive line now. And they obviously addressed it with a couple other linemen on day 3, but I don't think anyone's thinking Deontay Smith is going to contribute right away. Certainly not at this stage of his career, as he's got to develop some. So in the same thing with Trey Hill, by the way, 6th rounder. So do you go after a Trey Turner, who I think the Bengals might be low on? Do you go after one of these veterans that, yeah, might be another Quentin Spain, might be a little bit better at this stage of their career, but just in case, it doesn't work with Carman and he doesn't hit the ground running, you have at least a higher floor behind your second round pick.
You have to decide if you want to cut somebody that you value, right, at that point, because Deontay Smith should make this roster as a fourth round pick. Maybe he's Anthony Collins of the future, right? Maybe he's a good swing guy at multiple positions. Maybe he's never a starter. I think we need to bring back the expectations sometimes. Right after the draft, we're all like into it. All these guys can end up being starters, all 10 of them. The truth is, you're getting a lot of backups when you end up in day 3. And maybe he's Anthony Collins. That's fine. You would take that because they don't have a swing guy right now. But if Jonah Williams or Reef go down, who is their swing tackle? Is it Fred Johnson? Is it Akeem Adeniji? Is it Deontay Smith? Which all three of those seem a little bit scary. So they're a little bit thin there at tackle, but I'm not sure they can afford to cut any of those 3 guys. You may want them because of position versatility and the development and youth you have with Smith and Adeniji. So it comes down to a guard situation, whereas is it a straight up battle between Quentin Spain and Xavier Su'a-Filo at left guard? That's a fine battle. I'll take that as long as Michael Jordan, isn't in that conversation. Maybe he's on the final 8, 9, 10 guys that could be cut here. And then you look at right guard. Is it just Jackson Carman going to walk in? And do you get to camp and say, you know what, maybe Adeniji hasn't taken a step. Maybe Jackson Carman isn't ready to start at right guard this year. Maybe Trey Hopkins is going to be out a little bit longer. Maybe Trey Hill is going to be out a little bit longer, right? So that's when you get in the camp and you start to go, we feel good about our guy now, but let's see them on the field. A situation they didn't have last year. They didn't get all that camp in preseason, right? And they felt good about it, and then we quickly learned within a few games that, you guys were overestimating the talent on this offensive line. That could happen again, but at least you'll have a little bit of proof, or you can put them through, camp in preseason. If that happens, that's when I think these veterans that are still out there, and there's a couple of them that can play, maybe Trey Turner isn't the guy he used to be, or at least the Bengals don't feel that way, or else you'd probably sign him at the $2 to $3 million reported that he's asking for. But you get to camp and maybe things change. And I think that's where we could see maybe someone brought in.
Let's switch gears, talk about the defense a bit, because the Bengals drafted 4 defensive linemen, obviously have addressed the defense, spent huge money the past 2 off seasons trying to fix it, trying to make it better. I still don't really know how improved it is, at least with proven talent, but they certainly went after pass rushers and defensive linemen in the draft. What did you think about their maneuvers to, take Joseph Ossai, who felt like a value pick in the 3rd round, maybe the best value that they got in the draft, Tyler Shelvin, and the rest of the defensive linemen they were able to get?
Yeah, overall, my final few mock drafts were going wide receiver, O-line, D-line, just trenches, right? Just build it up, man, because it was an issue. Not only did they need starters, they needed depth. I remember thinking if they wait to round 3, round 4 for a pass rusher, this pass rush unit is probably going to be bad again. And that's not a recipe for this type of team that I think is going to try and throw the ball and put up points on offense. At least they have the ability to. You want to have a pass rush unit that can at least keep down that other offense from turning every game into a shootout. You don't want that. And the way they were built going into the draft, I was very concerned with their pass rush. Joseph Ossai, to me, I thought if you would have went in the end of first round, early first 5 picks of round 2, I'd have not have questioned it even one bit. I think he's just as good as Kwity Paye, a guy that goes in the first round. So, for me, he played 1 year of defensive end at Texas. But in that 1 year, I'm like, yeah, he can do it. This is the position he should be at. Now, he's only 255 pounds. He's not in the mold of what the Bengals typically would have drafted, those big, rangy guys. But they kind of have a new mold now. Well, after drafting Carl Lawson, I think they've kind of seen, you can go with these shorter, stockier guys that have a little bit of power in them. And I think with Joseph Ossai, instantly, there's a potential that he's their second best pass rusher on this team. And so I look at it in their nickel packages, and Trey Hendrickson's going to be there rushing off that right end there. Are they still going to kick Sam Hubbard in the D tackle? I think that's probably the best case scenario for him. And then that left end edge rushing position, I think, is Joseph Ossai. And if he has an impact as a rookie, even a Carl Lawson type impact, which was really good if you remember, a lot of pressures, a lot of hits, I do think that this defense could get a big boost in the pass rush department. And I love that they come back and get a Cam Sample, who I think can help. And I think Wyatt Hubert can. I don't say that about 7th rounders usually, but I think he should make the roster and help this team in some capacity. I thought if he was 5 picks after Cam Sample, I wouldn't have batted an eye at that. So I thought they were in the same category for me when the Bengals are getting 2 of them. The only pick I didn't really understand, and it's more more because I thought 3-tech was the big need, right? You look at their 3-tech position, and we got to separate D tackles. I think a lot of fans are still, look at D tackle as one position. But DJ Reader is a nose tackle. Tyler Shelvin is a nose tackle. Those are big bodies, space eaters. They're going to help you against the run. At 3-tech, it's going to be Larry Ogunjobi to start, and they wanted to sign other guys. So I thought, they set out smoke signals that 3-tech, they were very aware of the position being a big need. So they go through this entire draft, they don't take one. And now they've got defensive ends that can kick inside, Cam Sample, Sam Hubbard, but still, I think we're going to realize it's been a long time since the Bengals haven't had a 3-tech pass rusher in a Geno Atkins, right? 10 years of living with that. That creates a lot for the guys on the edge. They do not have that this year. Even Larry Ogunjobi, very inconsistent player, played nose tackle last year after Andrew Billings opted out for the Browns, so they kind of kicked him over. He will help what they had last year, but again, that's one of the weakest areas on this entire team. And if you're penciling in next year, first round, second round, I think 3-tech is up there with like corner and let's see offensive line. But, I think it's one of those pressing needs, and we're going to have to figure out if maybe that means they bring back Geno Atkins or something along those lines.
That's what I was just about to ask you. Much like I asked you about veterans on the offensive line, maybe they do try to bring Geno back. And I think the argument for a Geno is he clearly doesn't have a ton of offers out there. The interest isn't nearly what he was hoping for. And I get it. He wasn't good in 2019, played a ton of snaps, was overused. 2020, he was injured the whole time and tried to play through an injury. So what are teams going to be willing to spend with the salary cap down on a guy like that, even though he is an 8-time Pro Bowler? If I'm Geno, why move? Take the same deal you're going to get somewhere else in Cincinnati, keep your family here, bounce back and forth between Georgia and in Cincinnati, and try to prove yourself in what could be a nice rotation. If you add Geno Atkins to it, are you as concerned, at least in 2021? Because to me, that'd be a pretty good Band-Aid.
It would be, and he'd probably get the most money to come back to Cincinnati with the most clear, defined role. I mean, the team knows him. They know his shoulder injury. They know how to manage him. We didn't mention Mike Daniels, but the three of them, that's when it gets a little deep, though, of who you're going to cut. Are you going to cut Wyatt Hubert? I just said, I want him to be part of this rotation. Are you going to cut a Josh Tupou, Renell Wren? I think you could if you bring him back a Geno Atkins. You don't have a clear – it's hard to have a Tupou when you've already got a Shelvin and a Reader, right, because you got the big bodies. That second nose tackle is not going to be active other than are the Steelers going to be trying to run the ball now with Najee Harris? Are the Ravens, the Browns? I mean, division games, that's about it. Shelvin's probably not going to be active in the games against the Packers and the Chiefs and the teams that are going to throw it around. So you may want 2 or 3-tech types, and I think that's where Geno Atkins comes in, and maybe he's just a nickel pass rusher only, and you let Ogunjobi and Mike Daniels take a little bit of the beating against the run. I think that can make sense, and I would feel good about it. The only concern I would have there is the long-term need, because I feel like you should draft a D-tackle probably a year before you really need them, and I think Milton Williams was the guy that was pegged to them a lot. If Joseph Osai wasn't there, I think the pick could have been Milton Williams, but the fact that Osai was there, and they probably felt the same way I felt about him, that if he would have went in the first, early second, they wouldn't have been shocked. So they had him graded higher is my assumption, and that's the pick. So I'm going to go with that. That's how close they probably were to taking a 3-tech and instead ended up with Osai.
Last thing for me, Joe, unless you say something really interesting and I have a follow-up. But I think, obviously everyone's focused on the trenches. And those are the two really big weaknesses that this Bengals team tried to address. And we'll see if it pans out on the offensive and defensive lines. But what's your biggest concern outside of those two areas and Joe Burrow's health? Because we don't really know. We assume he's going to be back week 1. Hopefully he will be back week 1 and look like the same guy that was slicing up defenses towards the middle of last season. But outside of that, what's your biggest concern for this 2021 Bengals team?
It's still the defense as a whole. Obviously pass rush is going to be the thing everyone talks about. But the defense, the linebackers are all guys they drafted last year. It's sort of how they handled O-line, D-line this year, right? Taking 3 guys, and all of them you felt good about, especially the DNs they drafted this year. I feel very similar about the linebackers, like 7th round Wyatt Hubert versus the linebacker they drafted from Purdue. I'm forgetting, is it Marcus Bailey? I feel very similar. Yeah, they could play. They can help this team. Future second year 2, year 3, we're getting there for Bailey now, where I think he could help this team. So how do those guys develop? Do they take the next step? Do these linebackers, because it could be a bad unit again. Has it really affected them too much? Not really. It is linebacker. I feel that position's getting devalued more and more in the NFL these days. But, you do like the versatility and the speed of the guys like Jermaine Pratt and Akeem Davis-Gaither and Logan Wilson. And if they do take a step, that could be a unit of strength. It's just right now, I feel very unconfident that this is going to be that. I feel like it could just be another bad unit. And then the complete opposite approach has happened at corner, where they've signed all their guys instead and signed all these veterans that are still, 25, 26, 27 years old, and they know who their 3 starters are, and they finally have 2 backups that are capable, and Eli Apple and Darius Phillips. Not great players, but guys that have production in this league and have quality snaps in this league. I like Mike Hilton as a nickel corner. I think he can blitz. He can bring some tenacity against the run. He's a guy that's willing to get his head in there on every single play. The boundary guys, though, the ball skills, the deep ball skills, I think you're going to want to attack them, and that's how, if I'm looking at this defense, I'm like, okay, if I'm an offense trying to attack them, I say, I want to get these linebackers and test them. They're not very tested out there. They don't have a lot of snaps. I'm going to see if I can do some misdirection, play action, counter stuff, and get them out of position and really attack that. And then the outside corners, I'm going to try and hit them deep, and I'm going to try and give 50-50 balls to my receivers. If the week 1 game against the Vikings, man, I think those 2 outside receivers are going to cause some problems for those corners. And I think that could be the position we look at and go, they spent a lot of money. They've got a lot of resources there, but we are not satisfied with the high-end talent at boundary corner. And that's why I say we can come back this next year and say first round makes a lot of sense for corner.
So you're projecting Stingley then to rejoin Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase?
Not at all. He's a top 3 pick completely. I think no doubt about him. And the only way the Bengals pick top 6 or top 8 is if Burrow gets hurt again. So I don't think we're looking at that. I think even if Burrow finished last year, they win 6.5 games. So, I think that's the floor. Burrow takes another step. If they upgraded at receiver from Green to Chase, they've upgraded on the offensive line. This offense could score 30 points a game. And if they do, we're looking at least competing for 500.
No doubt. Yeah. If they score 30 plus, they'll be fun to watch. Can we just get that? Some fun to watch. No doubt. I mean, it's been 5 years, Joe. I feel like we've talked about the offensive line and issues and quarterbacks, and they solved the quarterback issue. I'm not sure about the rest of it, but make sure you follow Joe Goodberry at Joe Goodberry, and be on the lookout for those hats. He's wearing one now. They go quick. I'm sure you're going to be selling some in the near future. So, Joe, I appreciate the time. I'll probably bug you again before training camp.
That's fine with me. Take care, James.